Welcome to session 212 of the Bible in a Year commentary. If you started this series on the 1st of January, then today should be the 31st of July. Today we'll be looking at Haggai 1-2 and Psalm 57. But first of all, let's get a bit of an overview of Haggai. Haggai is a small book that records the prophetic words of Haggai, a prophet that was around at the same time as Ezra and Nehemiah. These people have finally left exile and have returned to Jerusalem. As we saw in Ezra and Nehemiah, hope for a better future is high, but repeatedly the people fail to live up to the commitment they made to God. Haggai is speaking to this same problem. Haggai's first prophetic word comes during the reign of King Darius of Persia. This is the same Darius we read about in Ezra, who allowed the Jews to continue rebuilding the temple. Have a look at Ezra 4 verse 5 and Ezra 6. And the same Darius we read about in Daniel, who prayed that Daniel wouldn't die in the lion's den. Have a look at Daniel 6. Here's a summary of the structure, but I'd recommend checking out the written version of this commentary in the description to see the structure properly for yourself. But we start with Haggai 1 verses 1 to 15, judgment for not rebuilding the temple, and then the people respond. Haggai 2 verses 1 to 9, encouraging the people in their shattered expectations of the temple. Haggai 2 verses 10 to 19, the Lord curses disobedience and blesses obedience. And then Haggai 2:20 verses 23, the future hope of God's kingdom. Following the flow of the pre-exilic and exilic prophets, Haggai picks up many of the core messages and applies them to the context the people now find themselves in. They are disappointed that they are not experiencing all that was promised them, and so Haggai serves as an encouragement that God will still do what he has promised. It is coming. But in the meantime, they are still required to be faithful to God. They still need to cling to God and avoid the mistakes of their ancestors. So let's jump in with today's reading, Haggai 1-2. The book starts with Haggai challenging the people, focusing on two key leaders, Zerubbabel, governor of Judah, and Joshua, the high priest. He points out that the people had stopped building the temple, but were happily building their own houses. They then wondered why they never have enough. God has withheld his blessings from the people because they have forgotten him. But if they would just turn back to him and rebuild his temple, he will bless them again. The people realized the error of their ways and immediately set to rebuilding the temple. Haggai then came back a month or so later. He acknowledges that some were looking at the new temple and were disappointed. We saw this in Ezra 3 verses 8 to 13. Haggai's message to these people was to be strong, for God is with them. Be faithful and obedient to the covenant that God made with his people all the way back in Egypt. There will come a day when the temple will be greater than it has ever been, and God will give his people peace. Haggai comes back another couple of months later and asks the people a question. If something holy touches something normal, does the normal thing become holy? No is the answer. Well, what if something is ritually unclean? Think back to all those rules we read way back in Leviticus, and then touches some food. Does the food become unclean? Yes is the answer. Haggai then points out that in the same way, when the Jews who are living unclean lives and not honouring God go and build the temple they make is unclean. Any offerings that they make at the temple will also be unclean. Haggai points back at the past harvests for evidence. The harvests were bad because the people have been unclean. But now, if they will choose to live holy lives, obeying God, and look forward to the future, Haggai promises them that they will see a bumper harvest. God will bless them for their faithfulness. This is a callback to Deuteronomy 28, where Moses warned and encouraged the people that they will be cursed for their disobedience, but blessed for their obedience. Finally, Haggai turns to encourage Zerubbabel. Zerubbabel was one of the remaining descendants of King David. While the people no longer had a king, the prophets had spoken of a king that God would raise up, a king from the line of David. Haggai confirms for Zerubbabel that he has been chosen by God to carry on the line of David. There will come a time when God will overthrow all the nations and all earthly kingdoms. In that day, he will raise up his king. And then the book just ends there. While a short book, Haggai carries an important message. If we are faithful to God, he will be faithful to us. And in the midst of the difficulties we face, there is a future hope coming, a king that will save and rescue us. But that is the book of Haggai. Now let's look at Psalm 57. This psalm is attributed to King David when he hid from Saul in a cave. Have a look at 1 Samuel 22 verses 1-2. The psalm can be split into two, with the first psalm being a lament psalm, including complaints, requests, and trust, and the second half is more of a praise psalm, as though it was written after God had rescued the psalmist. Here's a summary of the structure. Verses 1 to 5 is lament, and verses 6 to 11 is praise. The psalmist first turns to God with a request that God be merciful to them. It is in God that they take refuge until the storms pass, because He is a God who gives them purpose. The psalmist is confident that God will rescue them and put to shame their enemies. Why? Because He is a loving and faithful God. And so the psalmist brings their complaint. They are surrounded by enemies. These enemies are like lions or fiery beasts. Their teeth are like spears because their enemies want to consume them, and their tongues are like swords because they lie. And then the psalmist concludes the first half of the psalm with the refrain, "Be exalted, O God, above the heavens. Let your glory be over all the earth." And then we get the second half of the psalm, where the psalmist now seems to be talking in the past tense. Their enemies set their traps, and the psalmist was laid low, but their enemies fell into their own traps, because God has rescued them. This leads the psalmist to now praise God for His goodness. Their hearts has been strengthened, and now they sing. They will start the day with praise for God, almost awakening the dawn itself with their praise. They will also praise God in public, letting other people know of all that God has done. Why? Because He is a loving and faithful God. And so the psalmist ends the second half of the psalm with this same refrain, "Be exalted, O God, above all the heavens. Let your glory be over all the earth." In this one psalm, we get to see both sides, the lament and coming to God with our problems, and the praise and celebration once God has rescued us. Thanks for joining us today. Take a moment to reflect on what you've read and share your thoughts or questions below. If you're watching in the future, then you can click here for the next session, or you can find the full playlist just down here. To receive these daily commentaries in your email inbox, subscribe via the link in the description below. Have a great day, and I'll see you tomorrow.